Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving deep into a topic that affects not only global economics but also politics in our everyday lives. Tariffs. Now, tariffs aren't just taxes on imported goods, they're much more than that. Behind them lie complex economic principles and a fascinating history. Let's pull back the curtain on tariffs and see how they've shaped economies all around the world. The essence of tariffs is the economic expression of national sovereignty. A tariff is basically a tax that a country imposes on goods coming in from another country. It's a tool governments use to intervene in international trade by adjusting prices. Let's break down the core functions of tariffs in 3 parts. Tariffs have been a key source of government income throughout history. For example, back in the 18th and 19th centuries, tariffs accounted for over 90% of the federal government's revenue in the US. Even though other forms of taxation have grown, tariffs still make up a notable portion of government income. In 2022, tariffs contributed about 1.2% of the U.S. federal revenue, according to the U.S. Department of the Treasury. Tariffs are often used as protectionist tools. They protect a country's emerging industries by making foreign goods more expensive and less attractive. For instance, in 1879, Germany passed the Iron and Wheat Tariff Law, which increased the steel import tax by 50%, boosting the local steel industry and doubling its production capacity within a decade. Tariffs can also serve as strategic tools to influence international relations and reshape global supply chains. A recent example is the EU's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism launched in 2023, which ties tariffs to carbon emissions. This strategy aims to push countries worldwide to adopt higher environmental standards through trade. Tariffs are a powerful tool that governments use to regulate international trade, and they have a far-reaching impact. To help you better understand how tariffs work, let's break it down with a simple model. Let's imagine 2 countries, Chocolate Land and Candy Land. Chocolate Land produces chocolate, and each bar costs 10 chocolate coins. Candy Land imposes a 20% tariff on imported chocolate, so the price goes up to 12 chocolate coins per bar. Let's see what happens next. Because of the tariff, the price of imported chocolate goes from 10 chocolate coins to 12. That means consumers now have to pay more, and because of the higher price, chocolate consumption drops. The government collects revenue from the tariff. Let's say 1 million chocolate bars are imported each year. With a 2 chocolate coin tariff per bar, that means the government earns 2 million chocolate coins in tariff revenue. Since imported chocolate is now more expensive, locally produced chocolate becomes more competitive. The market share of local chocolate producers increases from 30% to 60%. However, without competition from imports, local producers may not feel the pressure to innovate, which could lead to lower efficiency over time. From this example, you can see how tariffs affect consumers, government revenue, and domestic industries. However, when creating and implementing tariff policies, governments need to carefully consider the potential negative effects. In real life, tariffs are a bit of a double-edged sword. While they can protect domestic industries, they can also spark complicated economic and political battles, sometimes even backfiring. The infant industry theory suggests that emerging industries need protection early on to grow strong enough to compete internationally. Alexander Hamilton, the first U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, proposed in 1791 that tariffs should protect new industries until they could stand on their own. For example, in the early 1800s, the U.S. imposed high tariffs on textiles, which helped develop a strong domestic manufacturing sector. Different countries designed tariffs according to their specific economic needs. For example, the U.S. imposed a 25% tariff on steel to protect its domestic steel industry. India imposed a 20% tariff on mobile phone imports to encourage local production. Brazil introduced an 18% tariff on ethanol to support its domestic biofuel industry. Tariffs don't just affect the target industry. They have a cascading effect throughout the economy. Number 1 is consumer welfare erosion. When tariffs raise the price of imported goods, consumers pay more. For instance, after the U.S. imposed tariffs on washing machines and solar panels in 2018, prices went up, costing American consumers billions of dollars each year. Number 2 is supply chain butterfly effect. Tariffs can also ripple through the supply chain. For example, after the U.S. imposed tariffs on steel, industries like construction and automobile manufacturing faced higher costs for materials, pushing up prices for consumers and businesses alike. Number 3 is retaliatory tariffs and escalation. When one country imposes tariffs, others often retaliate, escalating trade tensions. In 2018, for example, Canada targeted specific products from U.S. states, like Pennsylvania ketchup and Florida orange juice, forcing the U.S. to back off and remove many of its tariffs within a year. As the digital economy grows, tariffs are evolving. No longer limited to physical goods, tariffs are being applied to digital products and services. In 2023, the EU tested a dynamic tariff system that adjusts tax rates based on market conditions. For example, during a semiconductor shortage, tariffs on related products automatically dropped to ensure the market had enough supply. Tariffs on digital products like cross-border data flow or digital advertising are being explored. While still in the early stages, these digital tariffs could become a key part of future global trade policy. Over the last 300 years, tariffs have been a crucial part of global trade and politics, influencing economies in ways we often don't see. Let's take a look at some key moments in history. In the late 1600s and early 1700s, Britain used tariffs and trade laws to monopolize its colonial markets. They imposed high tariffs on goods from other countries to ensure that its colonies traded exclusively with Britain. These policies eventually led to the American Revolutionary War. German economist Friedrich List argued in the 1800s that Germany needed to protect its industries from foreign competition until they could be competitive. In Prussia, they gradually raised tariffs on textiles, helping develop the Ruhr industrial region. From the late 19th century to the early 20th century, the global economic landscape shifted dramatically, and tariffs played a crucial role in that transformation. During this period, the US used high tariffs to rise to economic dominance, becoming the global economic powerhouse it is today. The US is a prime example of how tariffs can help a country reclaim its position on the global stage. Between 1861 and 1913, US tariffs were consistently around 40%, which was quite high by global standards. In 1890, the US passed the McKinley Tariff Act, raising tariffs to a record 49%. This move directly fueled the rapid growth of American manufacturing, especially in the steel industry. Through protectionist policies, U.S. steel production skyrocketed from just 5% of global output to 40%, making it the leader in the global steel market. However, tariffs also have a dark side. In 1930, the U.S. passed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, raising import duties on thousands of goods to record highs in an effort to protect American agriculture and manufacturing during the Great Depression. But instead of helping, this policy backfired, plunging the global economy deeper into crisis. Other countries retaliated with their own tariffs on American products, which caused global trade to plummet. U.S. exports fell from $5.4 billion in 1929 to just $1.7 billion by 1933. This event showed how, beggar thy neighbor, policies where a country seeks to benefit at the expense of others can worsen a global recession. After World War II, the global economy underwent a profound shift. Countries began realizing the importance of free trade to revive the global economy. With the rise of globalization, tariffs gradually became more liberalized, leading to greater global cooperation. In 1947, the international community created the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, aiming to reduce tariff barriers and promote international trade through multilateral negotiations. By the 1990s, GATT successfully lowered the average tariff rate for industrialized countries from 40% to around 5%. With multiple rounds of talks, global trade barriers slowly faded, opening up international markets and accelerating globalization. However, GATT did include some sensitive product exemptions, such as Japan's rice tariff, which remained as high as 778% until 1999. These exemptions allowed certain countries to maintain protectionist measures while still engaging in free trade. During this period, developing countries used high tariffs to protect their domestic economies and facilitate industrialization. Take South Korea, for example. In 1967, it imposed an 8% tariff on imported cars and gradually reduced it to 8% over the next 2 decades. The South Korean government also introduced a localization rate policy, encouraging domestic firms to increase production capabilities. By 2000, the domestic production rate for Hyundai cars reached 92%, allowing South Korea to become a major player in the global automotive industry. As we entered the 21st century, tariffs found themselves at the center of a new age of global economic challenges. Globalization brought economic growth, but also new imbalances and unfairness. As the economic battle between countries grew more complex, tariffs began to evolve. Starting in 2018, the US-China tech war became a focal point for global attention. The U.S. imposed tariffs on Chinese high-tech products, especially semiconductors and 5G devices, hoping to curb China's development in these critical technology sectors. This tariff war not only intensified trade friction between the U.S. and China but also reshaped global supply chains. While the U.S. temporarily protected its semiconductor industry, it faced disruptions in the tech supply chain and rising costs. Meanwhile, China ramped up its efforts to innovate and build its own tech industry, reducing reliance on U.S. technology. As the world increasingly focused on climate change, the EU launched the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism in 2023. This system imposes tariffs on goods with high carbon emissions in an effort to push global trade toward a green economy. The goal is to force countries to raise their environmental standards and reduce global carbon emissions. This policy is expected to add over 20% in extra costs for countries like China's steel industry and India's aluminum sector, while also reshaping the rules of global supply chains in terms of environmental impact. Today, governments face a balancing act when it comes to tariff policy. The challenge is to strike a balance between protecting domestic industries, ensuring consumer welfare, and maintaining fiscal sustainability. For example, Vietnam lowered tariffs on electronic products to attract global tech giants like Samsung, driving domestic manufacturing growth. By using tariffs to attract foreign investment, Vietnam has upgraded its industries. Singapore almost has zero tariffs, keeping prices stable and ensuring consumers benefit from low prices. However, such low tariffs can hinder the development of local industries, leading to an unbalanced economy. Some countries raise tariffs to address budget deficits. For example, Argentina increased soybean export taxes from 33% to 38% in 2022 to boost government revenue. While it helped stabilize the budget, it sparked anger among farmers and triggered pushback from international trade partners. India's tariff policy is a prime example of the complexities governments face when balancing multiple economic goals. In 2023, India raised the wheat export tax from 0% to 40% to stabilize domestic wheat prices. However, this move didn't curb inflation as expected and caused fluctuations in global wheat prices. A few months later, India reduced the export tax to 20% in response to domestic and global economic pressures. Despite these adjustments, India's wheat export plummeted, costing the country around $2.7 billion in lost revenue that year. Looking ahead, tariff policies will continue to evolve, especially with the progress of global technology and economics. Here are some future trends we might see. As regional economic cooperation increases, tariffs within these zones will become more unified. For example, under the RCEP framework, car parts tariffs between member states will be eliminated, though the 15% tariff on finished vehicles will remain to protect domestic automakers. This creates a new model of chain and liberalization with chain-out protection, strengthening regional cooperation while safeguarding key industries from outside competition. As the digital economy grows, countries are starting to impose tariffs on cross-border digital services. The UK, for instance, has introduced a 2% digital services tax targeting tech giants like Amazon and Google. This new wave of digital tariffs could not only lead to negotiations between countries and multinational corporations, but could also become a fresh battleground for international trade disputes. In a world of rising geopolitical tensions, tariffs may be weaponized further as countries use them as tools in their strategic games. For example, Russia raised export tariffs on inert gases by 100% in 2022, severely impacting global semiconductor manufacturing. This move showcased the growing power of technology chain tariffs in modern global politics. Although the global average tariff rate has dropped from 40% in 1900 to 5% in 2023, the number of tariff-related trade disputes has increased sevenfold. As economist David Ricardo once said, tariffs are the eternal game of sovereign nations, and when they cease, it may mark the end of the very concept of a nation. That's all for today's deep dive into tariffs. I hope this video gave you more insight into the role of tariffs and their impact on global trade and economics. If you enjoyed this content, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our future videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.